Hi, and welcome to the Good Bloke, Not Woke podcast. My name's John Toomey, and this is episode 1 of the podcast. It won't be very long. It's more serves as an introduction to what I'm intending to do and to what I want to deliver to you over the next years, hopefully. A little bit of my background for those that don't know me. I am a Queenslander who's lived in Melbourne for a big part of my life. I started out my adult life studying physical education, worked in health clubs, worked in professional sport, did my master's studies in applied physiology, although because of personal reasons, I never quite finished that, and that's okay. But I explored many areas, and in 1985, I bought a computer because I had this sense that computers were going to be the future. Little did I know how much of the future they were going to be. But through that time, I've always been driven by curiosity and learning and trying to understand things. I'm a person who just needs to understand stuff. I don't like just being told something without it really landing in my universe, because I like to be able to explain it to others. And so that led me down many paths. And oftentimes when I was working in high performance roles, mostly in the AFL, sometimes with professional cyclists and a few others, I would come across athletes who just didn't match my Western science textbooks. The way they responded to training was very different. And so that pushed me to step outside the box and talk to more people. And I started talking with people from other disciplines. So Qigong masters and other types of martial arts, yogis, and I also started to delve into other forms of medicine, like traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, big forms of medicine in other parts of the world. And all of these things started to expand my understanding of human beings, the human genome. And along the way, I met a wonderful yogi named Neil Hopman. And Neil, beautiful guy, and he was a genuine yogi. He just wasn't a yoga teacher. Everything about him was yogi, the way he conducted his life. And he opened something up in me that led me on to more and more exploration and more study and more learning. And along the way, I found mentors. When I first came out of college, I met a fellow by the name of Chris Jones, who to this day was one of the most influential people in my life, because he taught me how to teach and he taught me how to write. And they're huge gifts, because in my career now, I'm a speaker and a writer. So Jonesy, what a gift. So this has all led me into this path. I started teaching at an early age because a friend of mine and I, were a few different friends, we got involved in writing and creating and delivering courses to teach people how to be fitness instructors. And because I was delivering those courses at night, people would often invite me to come to their company and give a talk about fitness or nutrition. And so that started me giving seminars, and I realized I had a gift for understanding the complex and then presenting it back to people in a simplified form so they could understand it. So over the years, I've delivered over 3,500 paid seminars in workplaces. In 2008, when the GFC hit, my business crashed. It basically evaporated overnight. I had all these bookings with banks and insurance companies, etc., and all of them cancelled all of their discretionary spend. And so it left me in a hole for quite some time, until a very good friend, Kevin Waldock, who owned a blast and drill company and he was operating in Queensland, asked me if I could help him out with a fatigue problem on his site. And that got me very interested in blue collar workforces. And so I started doing work for Kevin. We developed a fatigue prevention program. And at the time, everybody was using the term fatigue management, but we successfully changed that, because why would you manage something if you can prevent it? And then I got very heavily into the mental resilience. I studied human consciousness in great depth for 16 years under incredible teachers, following a set of courses and materials called the Avatar course. And out of that, I gained an incredibly broad understanding so that I could really be helpful to teach people skills that they needed to make a better fist of their life. And, you know, along the way, there was this incredible journey for me to grow enough to develop my own moral compass, my own knowing about what's the right thing to do and what's the wrong thing to do. And many times I did the wrong thing. Many times it was a mistake, but many times I was acting out of fear. Other times I was making decisions because I had a big ego, and you know, I was a bit drunk on that. So, but all the while I had teachers in place who could help me understand my errors and my mistakes and help me learn and grow and evolve through those things to stabilize myself into a place where I've got a really reliable and very robust moral compass. And, you know, that's not a short journey. And many people in a modern world where there's a lot of creature comforts, they don't take that journey and they just navigate their way through. But all the while, they feel a deficiency. There's an emptiness there because they don't have the confidence to fully trust themselves, let alone others. Now, it doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means they haven't taken the journey. And, you know, we see it oftentimes with elite athletes who are superstars in their own right, but they keep doing stupid things in public because of drink or other influences. But good mentors help them learn from that so they can grow and they can evolve through those things. And one of my great criticisms of our legal system is that when a person does something wrong, they commit a crime, they go to prison, they do their time, but they have to carry it around with them as a record of what they did, as opposed to being able to extinguish the past because they've paid for their sins and they can get on with their life again. But it seems that as a society, we want to be able to stain their existence forever and a day. Now, you might say something to me like, well, what about pedophiles? Yeah, I wrestle with that one too. But, you know, I wonder how many good people are in prison because they just screwed up and they made one single bad decision that caused mayhem. I wonder how many of those people, given the opportunity, would step out of prison and dedicate a significant chunk of their life for a number of years to make amends for what they had done and really repair the damage instead of just rotting in a cell somewhere. So our mistakes are our teachers, and we're going to explore this sort of stuff in the podcast, and we're going to talk about it a lot because my aim here is to help every single person who listens to this podcast, and it's probably going to be mostly men, but women are very welcome too, because they've got to develop their own moral code. And you see, my definition of healthy masculinity is it's a state that we achieve when we have done the work to develop that really robust moral compass, and then deciding that we have the courage to live by it. Because sometimes there's difficult decisions to make. We know what the right thing is to do, but maybe it won't be popular. Maybe there'll be some blowback. But having the courage to follow through, one of the things I can almost guarantee you is that when you feel a path and you know you've got to take it, but you know there's going to be some blowback, but you take it anyway, it always ends up eventually in a very good place. So I'm going to have lots of guests on. We're going to talk about these things. We're going to explore it. We're going to just have a really good time having some robust conversations. I'm going to interview men. I'm going to interview women of all walks of life, because I really want to explore this and I want to help you find your path so that you know how you can go about taking that step. You know, about 22, 23 years ago, I was given the job of running a men's health course for Vietnam veterans down on the Mornington Peninsula. Veterans Affairs were running these courses all over Australia, and I was given the Mornington Peninsula to work with. And I loved it. It was really great. And one day I turned up to class and I walked in and there was a lot of tension in the air and they were angry and they were bitching and moaning and carrying on about something. And I just stood there for a while and sort of tuned in and wondering what was going on. And one of them come and spoke to me and said, look, Veterans Affairs have changed some things and the guys are angry. They think this might be the beginning of the end of their benefits. And it was very reactive. And I just let it go for about 10 minutes and I closed my folder and put my materials away because I knew that I couldn't really deliver my planned lesson for that day. But I just followed what I felt. And I called them to order and I just said, you blokes are the dumbest people I've ever met. You're seriously dumb. And they looked at me with wide eyes and I said, seriously, you just don't get it, do you? I'm amazed, but you're so dumb, you just don't get it. And I let that sit for a little while and they were looking right at me and I said, here I am, I'm 42, I've got kids, I'm trying to make my way in the world. And I often have this contemplation and wonder when it is that I'm going to finally feel like a man. I yearn for some rite of passage that's going to help me step across that line and fully leave behind my youth and step into that powerful place of really feeling like a good man. And I said, I struggle with that. And I said, here you guys are, all of you, you got put in a position when you're very young where you're forced to look death right in the eye and then walk towards it. I said, I don't know if you understand how special that makes you. To me, that is the profoundest form of courage, and you guys all pulled it off. I don't know how you did it. I said, but that gives you a profound level of wisdom and understanding of the genuine edges of existence, the edges of life. I said, you should be out there in the community finding every young teenager who's going off the rails and taking them under your wing and telling them your story, connecting with them, supporting them to step through their stuff and to grow and become better human beings. That's what you guys have got. I haven't got that. I can't tell you how the rest of the session went. I just don't remember. But we had some amazing conversations. The following week, 50% of them didn't come back. I never saw them again. But the rest of them, man, did they make a contribution in the community. It was extraordinary. There was times they brought me to tears. And over the journey, I might tell some more stories, and one very special story from that time. But this is what it's about. This is about us as human beings stepping up, because in modern societies where there's a lot of wealth and there's a lot of comfort and there's a lot of convenience, there's nothing forcing us to grow. It's optional. And I want to support everybody to step into that space and take that opportunity to grow and become a confident person with a really healthy masculinity. Something that puts you in a position where the people around you trust you, they feel safe around you, and you can step in to leadership in your family and your community when the need arises. So that's my quest with this podcast. And I really hope you'll get on board and join us and listen in to some of the interviews. And when I do these interviews, I'm going to be interviewing people like former elite athletes, politicians, dads, mums, people who have done extraordinary things. It doesn't matter, straight men, gay men. I just want to talk to everybody and really explore it. And I know I've got people in my life that I look after, and I'm going to do everything I can to get them on the podcast as well, because they've all got really rich stories to tell, and some of them will resonate with you. And, I really invite you to share this podcast around and really get other people on board, because collectively as a community of people, we can get more and more people on this path, and we can really elevate what we're doing in society. And so the question that I'm going to ask all of my interviewees, and I'm going to ask you this today, is who is a man that you looked up to in your younger life? Who's somebody that you felt safe around, that you liked listening to, that you admired? And what is it about them? What were the qualities of that person that made them appeal to you as much as they did? You know, one of mine was my dad's brother. His name was Pat Toomey. What a guy. He had his own, he was involved in the Second World War. And when he came out, he played footy, played a few games at Richmond. But one of his mates at Richmond got the job as captain coach of Hobart. So he went down there and played quite a few seasons for the Hobart Football Club. And he got married and had a family. And he had a business where he provided paper bags and brown paper for all sorts of businesses, a lot of food businesses. And behind the scenes, in his own quiet way, he was just working really hard wherever needed to relieve suffering in the world. And one of his favourites was a boys' orphanage in South Melbourne, the St Vincent's Boys' Orphanage. And he was a tireless worker for raising money and supporting that orphanage in any way that he could. And when we first moved to Melbourne from Queensland, my parents they were publicans. We had a pub in a small town called Miles in Queensland, and in 1970, they sold that and bought a pub in Hoddle Street in Abbotsford, so right on the border of Collingwood. And, as soon as my dad got in there and got settled, my uncle had a couple of collection boxes put in there at the ends of the bars so that we could get the blokes to put, 10 cents in there, 20 cents. I mean, back then a glass of beer was 14 cents. So 10 cents was a good donation. And my old man made rules. Anybody caught smoking over the pool table or anybody caught swearing in the pub had to put a coin in the box. There was just fines. And they raised a lot of money and they ran Christmas stocking raffles and all sorts of things to raise money for that orphanage. And anyway, at my uncle's 80th birthday party, it was incredible because everyone was giving speeches and he was really unwell by that point. And when the speeches were almost over, a woman put her hand up and she said, do you mind if I say a few words? And nobody really knew who she was. And she said, my husband and I have known Pat for over 20 years. We first met him when we contacted him to supply us with brown paper and paper bags for our business. We've got a gourmet pie business. We make gourmet pies and sell them to cafes and all sorts of businesses. And she said the first time he came to give a delivery, he was very curious and he got us to show him around our kitchens, show us what we did. And we walked past a box where we tossed all the broken pies. And he asked what it was. And she said, we told him. And he said, what do you do with them? And she said, well, we just throw it out. And he said, well, I know a bunch of boys in an orphanage who would never get to eat things like that. Can I take them? So every day from then on, he started popping past, picking up the broken pies to drop them off at the orphanage. And she said, when he sold his business, he started to wind down. She said he would pop in at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, put on an apron and help us out free of charge. He just helped out in the kitchen. And she said, and we started breaking a lot more pies. And those pies would go to the orphanage. And his family stood there, mouths open. They had no clue that he'd been doing that because he was just a quiet, silent operator who saw things that were needed in the world and he just did them. And I loved him dearly. He was just such a profoundly decent human being with a level of care that's rare in this life. And so I want to hear the stories from my guests about the people that touch them in their lives, because those sorts of people can be very inspiring to help all of us to get outside of ourselves and become better at being who we really want to be. another small segment I'm going to cover each week is what's happening in sport. What's some good things that have happened in sport where people have acted really honourably? I really want to search those out because there's a lot of extraordinary things get done in sport. You know, I remember when I was in a high performance role at Richmond Football Club in 1999, and Matthew Richardson, who I reckon is one of the kindest people I ever met in all my years in footy, just such a deeply decent guy, you know. And he was exhausted after a big training session, and he had a capacity to push himself that very few did. So he was really, really exhausted. And he stepped out the front of the club, and there was 2 busloads of school kids out there. And they saw him, and they came running over. So it was over 100 kids. And he just put his bag down, and he looked at the first kid, took his autograph book and said, "What's your name, mate?" And the kid said, so it was Jared. And he wrote in the autograph book to Jared, "Matthew Richardson, number 12, go Tigers." And he handed back the autograph book, ruffled the kid's hair, and went to the next kid. And he stayed there until every single kid had an autograph. And to me, that's incredible. And, you know, I understood him sometime later during the season when we were playing a game at the MCG, and there was a couple of minutes before the game started, he ran over to me and he said, "JT, can you give my hammies a quick stretch? I just feel a little bit tight." So he lay down his back, and I was kneeling over him with his leg up over my shoulder, taking him through a stretch. And there were some opposition fans leaning over the fence, and they were giving it to him. It was vitriolic and it was awful. And I looked down at him and I said, "How do you handle that, Matthew?" And he said, "Oh, Johnny, I love those people." I said, "Really?" And he said, "Johnny, those people pay my wages." He goes, "It's just footy. It's not personal." I thought, wow, I learned a lot from a young guy in that moment. So I really want to look at footy and see the good stuff that's happening, not just footy, cricket, all sports. Let's see who's doing some great stuff and setting some really good examples. And each week I'll finish it off with a thought for the week. And I've got one here from Harry Palmer, who created the Avatar materials, and it's one of my favorite quotes from Harry, and it says, "Where you are now is where you once decided you wanted to be. And there's no sense in second guessing the wisdom behind the decision. It made sense at the time." So as I leave you at the end of this initial podcast, and it's a lot shorter than the future ones will be, I offer you something that you can take away and maybe you can shoot for. And that is, I invite you to be the adult that you needed when you were a kid and you're in trouble or you're frightened. So thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on many more podcasts. And please share this around.